Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dancing with Damage. I'm your resident philosopher, Ian.
I'm your resident author, Abby.
This is your resident corgi, Archie. And today we're going to get into how the best childhoods are theoretically formed according to our theory.
Ooh, spicy. So, Ian, how would you like to start our conversation?
Let's recap a bit from the last episode. We were talking a bit how, if we look at how the subconscious emotions are laid out with the three dancing pairs, 6 emotions in total in the subconscious: guilt, grief, love, hate, rage, and joy. And that if the bond between a parent and child, which should be 100% love, is tainted with a bit of hatred, which again is selfish damage behavior, and love is selfless sacrificing behavior, if that happens, then the other dancing partner, guilt, swoops in, lives in the subconscious of a person for their whole life, unless they're sort of detected, but we'll talk about that, but lives in the subconscious of a person their whole life and causes self-sabotaging behavior, which in our theory is the reason why people are always getting in their own way and society is always spiraling in the wrong direction. So that's a bit what we talked about. Now, Abby, we have a parable or a fable in the book, The Social Blueprint, I believe it's called. There it is.
We've never actually shown you inside the book. Look how fun. Look at all the words. We wrote so many words.
You were surprised that there were words in the book.
I know. Who would have thought? Words in a book.
Well, there you go. So
I really like, as an aside, the font that was chosen because it reminds me of Star Wars. I don't know if anyone else likes Star Wars out there, but there's a fun random fact for you.
Wow. People like Star Wars? Yeah. I like The Social Blueprint.
I do too.
I'm making all kinds of connections here. So there's a chapter in there about potters and the clay. So Abby, what did you mean when you wrote about that fable?
I can give you a little brief history. So essentially, there are 2 potters or clay makers. I don't know what the official term is nowadays in 2026, but people who make stuff out of clay, like vases and plates and other clay stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, we're probably not going to open a pottery shop anytime soon because we'll have a limited stock.
A gravy boat. I don't know.
You have 3 options. We don't have to make gravy boats because we can just tell people to put gravy in the vase.
Gravy vase. Anyway, so that's not the point of this parable. The parable essentially is that there's 2 very well-to-do potters in this town, and they compete for the business of other people. One takes great care, and he makes sure that a vase or a pot is made well. It's made without any cracks. He takes care to make sure it's evenly pottered. And every time he throws it in the kiln to be hardened, it comes out beautiful and perfect, and it always does the job. If it's meant to hold a liquid, it will hold that liquid. The other potter,
like gravy.
I like gravy. And the other potter, in an attempt to save some time and try to get ahead of the first potter, thought he'd cut some corners. He tried to make things quickly. He made them rough. He allowed the clay to be too thin in places, and it cracked when it went in the kiln. So when it came out, there were all these cracks in the vases or the pots, whatever it is he's making. I don't know.
We don't know.
At this point. We don't know.
Use your imagination.
Yeah. So all the people used to come and return all of his pots and vases and gravy boats to him because they kept breaking or they kept having giant holes and all the liquids would come out of them, which is the exact opposite purpose of the thing they purchased. So what he'd try to do was fashion a patch out of clay to cover the crack or the hole that was made. But the problem is, once a pot has been in the kiln and it has been through the fire, it is sort of forged. And you can keep making patches, but the patches will never be 100%. They often fall off or they don't fit right. So eventually, he went out of business because no one would buy things from him because they knew that he didn't do things right the first time. Therefore, his things were not worth buying.
Patchy pottery. And so the moral of this story is not only to maybe buy Tupperware, is that the human brain, especially during the development of the subconscious, is when it's the most malleable. So you're 0 to 5 years old. The scientific community generally agrees that's the time when the brain is the most shapeable. And we kind of know this because, for example, you've probably heard or experienced that if you learn a language when you're like 2 versus trying to learn the same language when you're like 40, it's much easier to learn as a 2-year-old, despite the fact a 2-year-old is usually not considered as bright as a 40-year-old. Like, you may not go to the 2-year-old for your taxes, maybe the 40-year-old, but in terms of learning sophisticated, very challenging things, that small brain is better because it's so malleable. So the clay of the potter that's put on the spinning wheel is like the brain of the young person. And that's when it's being shaped, and that's when the subconscious emotion are being shaped into the pot. Now, ideally, we want our subconscious brain to not sabotage ourselves, to be able to show love, receive love, and have fundamental happiness, and to use the other emotions, or to display the other emotions, guilt, rage, hate, love, joy, at the appropriate times. But if the potter's not doing his job, as Abby said, then we're going to get non-compliant emotions, and they're going to go in the kiln, and then through adulthood, it's very hard to change it. So that's sort of what the story is getting at. But what's interesting here is if the pot, or the vase, or the
gravy boat,
or the cauldron, whatever you're making, if that's the brain of the child, who is the potter?
I believe it would be the parent, or the guardian of the child, I should say.
Yes, we call the potter the parent figure. And in the end of the day, that's what the parent figure really does. They're the ones who shape, especially from the 0 to 5-year-old, the most. They're the ones who actually have their hands on the clay. Now, of course, in many families, that task is divided between a few people. So in our story, the potter is just the composite average skill of all the people who are handling the pot. But we like just one potter because it's hard to imagine like a gang of potters trying to like shape.
Chaotic.
Yeah, it's just too many angles. You can see one's underneath trying to get it. It's like screwing in a light bulb. So that's not good. So why this chapter, or where this episode is called The Path of the Child, is because if we all agree that it's important, very important, to take the most care of a pot when it's being formed, and we all agree that it's the most important thing to take care of a child, in particular between the ages of 0 to 5 for this reason, then there must be some formula to create the best pot.
Indeed. And Ian, can you tell us what that formula is?
I will tell you. Now, there's a little disclaimer here. So Abby and I don't have kids. So you might be asking, well, Ian and Abby, why would your advice on raising children, the best way to raise children, especially in the age of 0 to 5, be worth listening to? And that's a fair question, hey, Abby?
Yes, I don't know. I feel the need to give my credentials, but I will remember that we say, as a very paramount thing, you should not look at an argument based on who is explaining to you the argument. You should look at the argument purely for its merit. You should look at what we are saying and independently within yourself ask, does this make sense and why? And if you fundamentally disagree and you have a why, we'd love to hear it. But if it fundamentally makes sense, maybe you should ask yourself, why does it make sense? It shouldn't matter who is giving you a message. It should matter if the message rings true.
That's right. And so in the social blueprint, we argue that the best way to raise a child is like raising a plant. Well, the analogy is about raising a plant.
We have a lot of analogies.
No, we don't want people to put children in pots and then bury them with some soil or whatever. That's not...
I will spat my water out on you.
Oh yeah, don't do that.
Why do you say funny things when I sip?
Well, we don't want people to do that. Although water is important to the story. So it could have been helpful, like a prop. Anyway, so that's not what we're saying. The story that we talk about in the book is that there are these two brothers, and they're each trying to grow a tomato plant or some sort of plant. And the mother says to them,
oh, I was just going to say I really like this story. But continue, sorry.
It's a very fun story.
It is.
It's a very fun story. And so the two brothers are told by their mother, if one of you can grow a lot of tomatoes, I'll be really proud of you and see what you can do. So the brothers go off in competition with each other to grow the best plant out of their pots they have. And so one brother talks to a farmer, and the farmer says, well, the best thing is sunshine for plants. Other brother goes to another farmer and says, well, rain's really important for plants. So the brothers go off to grow their plants, and one of them leaves the pot with the tomato seed in the sun all the time, and if it starts to rain or anything else, he takes the pot inside, so it never gets any water. And then the other brother, who thinks that only rain is good, leaves it out when it's pouring rain and submerses it in a tub, spits water on it, for example. Puts it near Abby.
Didn't mean it. Sorry.
And so, but if it's sunny out, puts it away somewhere. So anyway, the moral of the story is neither tomato plants grow. So the mother says, well, if either of you had asked what was best for a plant generally, the farmers would have told you need both in equal measure. And so, what is the sunshine for a child, and what is like the rain for a child? Well, we say it's like affection is like the sunshine, and discipline is like the rain.
Yes, and we argue that both are important in a child's life to have balance. And there are different parenting styles floating around, and there's different scientific studies and different personal anecdotes. I can say, as a teacher, I have seen and met many parents, and I have witnessed sort of evidence of their styles. And I would argue that too much of one extreme is never a good thing. Think of it like chocolate, the delicious nectar of the gods, which we partake in for dessert when we have been very well behaved and made sure we did our workouts all week. Chocolate, nature's magic. Too much is bad, but not enough makes you depressed. So you have to have balance. And think of that like raising a child. Sorry, I really want some chocolate. But it is a good analogy because having no happiness or fun in your life makes you miserable. You have nothing to look forward to. But if you only do fun, indulgent things, it'll make you sick.
There you go. So Abby really likes chocolate. But she's not wrong about her example. And some people might be saying, well, what do you mean by affection? What do you mean by discipline? And it covers such a wide range. So do you have an example of things that your parents would do that made you feel wanted and was affectionate towards you when you were growing up?
Yes. So a lot of words of affirmation. You did a great job. I'm so proud of you. What a beautiful picture. I don't know what it was. They show me artwork I made when I was 5. They kept it. I don't know why. I guess Stockholm syndrome. And they're like, look, you made this. I don't even know what it was. But they praised me for it. They're like, you're such a good artist. You're so talented. You can be whatever you want when you grow up. And they would do a lot of fun activities, take us to the park, to the aquarium, to the amusement park.
You gave your parents Stockholm syndrome.
I probably did. I've met me. They're too nice.
Oh dear.
But a lot of allowing things to slide would be an example. My parents did not do that. They were good at moderation, I will argue, for the most part. An affectionate parent in general could be somebody who maybe excuses bad behavior and says, "Oh, it's okay. They're just young. They're just growing up. They're just learning." And a behavior might end up being problematic later on, such as taking somebody else's toy or hitting or yelling or crying, and just sort of allowing that to happen and saying the child needs to work through whatever they're working through. That could be an example of sort of very kind kitten glove parenting. Anything you want to add?
Well, if we're talking about ways a parent can show affection in a positive way, the sunshine of the tomato plant, one might say. For me, my parents liked to give me hugs when I was very young. That was very common for me to be sitting on their lap, reading a book.
Oh, yeah, me too. I was trying to think of more like in general.
Just doing fun things with the child, being positive around them. These are examples of the sunshine that's appropriate. And then, of course, Abby, do you have any examples of the rain, some discipline that you received at the hands of your parents?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it ranges from normal, socially acceptable to some people experience negative, very negative discipline. My experience was very positive, but they were firm. So if I broke something, they would tell me, I can't do that. That's not okay. Even if it was an accident, you have to be careful. You can't use carelessness as an excuse in life. You can't break things and say, oh, I didn't mean it. And then it's just okay. Little kids sometimes yell at each other over Barbie dolls. And they'd say, no, you can't do that. You have to share. You have to be kind. You have to be a leader, you have to do good things. So there would be reprimand. They'd take away something if we were fighting over it, or if you couldn't behave well in a restaurant or in a store. It's like, okay, we're just going home. They've done that actually. With my sister, she wasn't behaving well in Sears, so they just took her home. It was great. I looked like the best kid.
So you bullied your younger sister and you gave your parents Stockholm syndrome.
Actually, I didn't bully my sister. I was really nice to her.
Am I safe right now? This is what people might be asking. So those are great examples. So discipline, for example, commonly is if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going to have dessert. For myself, if I didn't want to practice my piano, then maybe I wouldn't get to watch my Land Before Time movie that I wanted to watch. Things like that. And so there's also, Abby's right, when we kind of instinctively know or can remember times, oh, goodbye, Archie, times when we had affection in our lives as young children, as when we were the clay to the potter's wheel, and times we had discipline. And Archie just got off my lap. You can really see it very clearly with dogs, for example. If you've ever had a dog, if the dog is barking, you don't want it to bark, you say no barking, you have a stern tone, and the dog wants to please the owner, so it learns something from that. Or if you like that the dog sat down when you told it to sit down, you would give it a rub on the head,
say good boy,
play with the dog. Those are so it's very common for humans to instinctively understand a balance between raising an entity so that it conducts itself in the best way possible and has the best life possible. But having said that, Abby brought up that there's a range. There's a range on both of these things, just like in weather. Like sunlight is good, but a drought is bad for a plant. Rain is good for a plant, but a monsoon is bad for a plant. So let's talk a bit about what a drought would be, an example of what maybe people would see as affectionate, but is too affectionate. Abby, what's an example of that?
So I alluded to this a little bit earlier because I got excited, but I see it a lot now where it's sort of enablement parenting is how I will describe it. And it's allowing behavior to slide because there are a group of parents now who maybe had a parent who was too much of a disciplinarian. They remember being scared or frightened, or they had an adverse child experience. So they're like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be the fun parent. I'm going to be loving. I'm going to nurture their emotional well-being, which is all good. But it gets to a point where it's too far, where a child grows up and they're like, oh, it's okay. They're just little. It's cute. But then all of a sudden they get to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and they're still bullying people. They're breaking things. They're being careless. They don't respect boundaries. They don't listen when you talk to them, even if it's for their own safety. They refuse to cooperate. They refuse to respect any authority figures. And it goes from something that a parent is trying to sort of be understanding or saying, oh, it's cute, it's fine, they're just a little kid, to now it's a serious problem and it's not cute anymore, but it's been going on for so many years, it's really hard to correct that behavior.
Yeah, the more that the clay pot, the longer it spends in the kiln, the harder it is to ever change it. So we're going to talk about that later. When I think of a over affection that doesn't help the plant to grow, the child to grow, I think a lot of spoiling. I see this a lot where young people, are just given anything they're asked for. And on the surface, it looks, oh, that parent really cares about their kid. They're willing to buy them whatever they ask for. They're willing to do whatever the child wants to do. The child gets to eat whatever they want. But we all know, if we've ever interacted with people, that kind of behavior is actually an incorrect form of affection. So, in fact, we'll get to that in a bit. Hold on to that, in fact. Don't go anywhere with that, in fact. I'm going to say it shortly. Now let's talk a bit about the monsoon, the flip side. So Abby discussed her sister being sort of taken out of Sears when her sister was causing a ruckus and her parents wouldn't spoil her.
It happened one time and it was fabulous.
She talks about it a lot. I guess this was a great moment for young Abby. It's funny, like for me, it would have been like a sporting event with my family or like a nice dinner or something. But having your sister, arrested by her parents is good too. So anyway, let's talk about the monsoon, the flip side of discipline. Abby, what comes to mind when you think of a discipline that's perhaps not in the best interest of the plant?
the obvious examples that come to mind are physical disciplinary strategies, which nowadays we usually have akin to illegal, and it's some debate about illegality, where you would physically hit a child, you would physically drag them somewhere, you would put them in a corner for a timeout, but maybe for an hour or a long time, or lock them in a room where they can't leave. I've seen cases where people withhold food, which is definitely bad when someone is young and growing and needs the nutrition for their brain to develop. But those are some examples that come to mind. But again, usually, unfortunately, this side usually is sort of married with criminality a little bit.
True. So examples of discipline that goes contrary to the interests of the tomato plant of childhood would be physical abuse, mental and emotional abuse. That's easy for parents to do, to say things to a child to kind of tear them down. And of course, a 4-year-old has no way of defending themselves. If a parent is screaming in their face, there's no hope of that child recovering from that. So that's disciplinary, because the parent is trying to, usually in those circumstances, trying to prevent a behavior. Like, let's say a child throws a rock at a dog and the parent reaches down and punches the child in the head, saying you can't do that. It's good to discipline your kids, but not in that fashion. And so we actually, using the theory of love, can actually discern which type of sunshine and which type of rain is good for the tomato plant, is good for that pot that's being shaped on the wheel, and which is actually negative for those things. And Abby, what was the definition of love?
Love is sacrificing for the benefit of someone else or your future self, which is a short-term discomfort or short-term pain for a long-term gain.
And another way of talking about love is, it's always, and we talked about this too before, it's almost always the harder thing to do, because the opposite of love is damage, and damage comes with instant gratification. Love almost always comes with delayed gratification, because it's long-term interest versus short-term interest. It's just the way life is. So that's how we can tell which type of parenting, which type of discipline, and which type of affection is actually the loving type. Because let me ask you this, Abby. Let's take the example of your father when he was at Sears. I don't know what your sister wanted at Sears. Let's say she wanted a pair of shoes. Did they sell shoes at Sears?
They did.
Sears is closed now, so search me for what they sold.
Everything. It was glorious.
It was glorious. No wonder she wanted to buy something.
Love Sears.
So Abby's father wanted to buy things at Sears. He wanted to shop. Little sister is making a fuss and wants to buy a toy and is having a temper tantrum, which children often will have when they're trying to get what they want. Which, if the father wanted to discipline the sister in an instant gratification way to immediately stop the problem, he could have smacked her, let's say, or pinched her, or gotten down and sort of said some really nasty things to her. That would have worked probably right away. So that anything that works right away is almost always a damaged, sort of selfish thing. This is what we know. It's general rule. But what he did instead was he picked her up and took her out of the store. Well, that totally disrupted his plans, because he wanted to shop, and now he's going to have to make another trip. But because he did something that inconvenienced him and caused him a sacrifice by not hurting her.
He didn't yell. He didn't scream. They just left.
Didn't yell.
He just said, if you don't stop, we're leaving. And then they did.
That's right. So didn't yell at her, didn't hurt her, right? If you pick up a child, that's okay, because it's not abusing them. And they left the store. So that was an example of loving discipline. So anything that immediately solves the problem for the parent in a disciplinary sense is almost always a form of hate.
And Ian, just to complete the example, what would be the sunshine instant gratification example that would also be a form of hate?
In that example, or just generally? So that's right. So let's say, and this is very common, the parent just caves and says, sure, let's buy those toys. Anything else you want, kind of thing. Like anything to stop the kid from crying and acting out. So that would have been a form of hatred, because it solves the problem right away. It's not a sacrifice for the parent to do that. I mean, sure, they lose a few bucks, but realistically, toys aren't that expensive. It's not much of a sacrifice. So that would have been an example of hate. But an example of love in that sense could have been the parent, maybe her dad says, well, You don't need that toy, but I think we're going to get you this book. This is a great book. We're going to read this book together. You're going to learn about marsupials from it. Who doesn't love a good marsupial book? Maybe the father felt his daughter didn't know enough about marsupials.
I was going to say maybe you can earn it. If you want it so badly, maybe we can come up with some chores you can do and I can give you money towards it. Or if you do X, Y, and Z, then I will come back and get this toy together. So you sort of understand the value of it. That's another potential better solution.
Sure. So that's sort of the litmus test, if you want, that we're talking about with this particular chapter, or this particular episode, which was the path of the child. And what we really wanted to convey is, in our theory, it's important to have a balance between affection and discipline, and that the affection and discipline be a loving affection and discipline and not a hatred affection and discipline. Because again, we're always talking about what allows hatred to infiltrate a relationship and cause that guilt, which causes self-sabotage, which is damage, which is what we don't want. And just to be, crystal clear, Abby, how would you describe the phenomenon of why spoiling and that kind of thing is a negative thing for young people?
Yes. So for the disciplinarian track, it's pretty obvious to see how extreme, essentially, violence could lead to feelings of hatred and distrust and, issues. But when you spoil or allow too much sunshine, children crave boundaries. They instinctively know that their parents are supposed to set limits for them because historically, all creatures set limits for their children to show them what is safe, to show that they love them. Because you need boundaries. You need to know how to live in a society, because society doesn't allow people to just do whatever they want. You have to have limitations. There are rules you must follow. And the parent's job is to teach the child how to live within those rules. So if a parent is just saying everything's okay, the child subconsciously knows that they're not being prepared for their future. They're not being prepared to live in a society, and they're not getting those signals from a parent that there are limitations. So they feel there's an absence of love there. And allowing a child to sort of run the house is never a good thing, because again, they don't have the capacity. Their brains are not developed enough to make good, rational decisions for their own well-being. And if they don't immediately, they will come to resent that in the future. Sort of like if a kid makes a lot of money from birthdays and Christmases or a job, and the parent lets them spend it all on toys or candy, by the time they get to post-secondary education, maybe they've spent $10,000 on garbage that they've ended up throwing away, that if their parent had limited them, they might have put some in a savings account and had something towards education. So now, as sort of an adult or getting into the adult years, they're at a disadvantage, and they will resent the fact that they weren't given those boundaries and they weren't told what was best for them, because in the long run, it was not in their best interest. So Ian, what are some modern day common examples of some of these problems that we're talking about that you can identify?
I want to talk about The Lion King.
Love it.
Good movie. And back to Abby's point. So let's say in The Lion King, I recall Mufasa was very clear with Simba. Said, don't go to the elephant graveyard. He's like, don't go over there. And Simba was like, but I want to go over there. Mufasa was like, you can't do it. And in fact, I'm going to set a babysitter to watch you, so you don't go over there.
Zazu.
So that was good parenting, because even though Simba really wanted to explore, Mufasa set boundaries. Now, if Simba said, I want to go over and check out that dark, evil-looking area, I remember it was pretty evil-looking when I watched it, and Mufasa had said, yeah, sure, like, go ahead. That would have been like a parent who is like spoiling a child, but to their detriment. You see, because if the Simba in all of us wanders off into the elephant graveyard, then you saw what happened in the movie. It gets really dark, and you get surrounded by celebrity voice actors. Just horrific. You barely make it out, and then people are like playing ribs with femurs. You don't want that. So definitely, I see where Abby's coming from.
Actually, that's an excellent point, because children know that the danger exists, and if there's no parameters, there's nothing to explain what the danger is. And if you end up in a dangerous situation because no one warns you, that is extremely negligent.
It's a very ancient instinct for the child to expect boundary setting by the parent. Think of any animal in nature that kind of raises their cubs or their kittens or their offspring or whatever you want to do. Like, if a mother lion lets her cub go play by the river where there's a crocodile, there's going to be no cub. The cub wants to know what water is safe to go to, what water is not safe to go to. The architect of our brains, the instinct, expects boundaries from the parent figure. Because in nature, if you didn't have that, there wouldn't be a future for the child. It's just the world is too dangerous. And that's still true today. There are many pitfalls in society that if a child falls into, see Exhibit A, hyenas, femurs, example. So in any event, other things we see, very common today's society, we see the child want to play on their iPad, want to watch shows, different cartoons that are flashy and sort of addictive and all that sort of stuff, want to watch that on their iPad. And the parent lets them, enables them, right? A young child has no ability to pay for an iPad or buy an internet subscription, so that it's very easy for the parent to cut them off from that damaging outlet, but it's not commonly done. And there's another reason how technology gets under the skin of that important bond. 500 years ago, iPads weren't a huge issue. You had your tablet, but right, you could have an Apple tablet, but that's just a cutting board for a pie at that point.
How long were you thinking of that? That's very funny.
My whole life, just my whole life. So those are maybe some examples, and I'm sure you can think of your own examples of how parenting can go south in many veins. But how most countries sort of look at that, as we talked about last time, adverse childhood experiences, you can divide them into abuse, both physical and emotional. Great example is, shaken baby syndrome. The parent wants the child to be quiet. If you shake a baby, you're going to get an instant result, but you're also going to not be acting in the best interest of the child. So those are sort of those examples. And then you have spoiling, neglect, that don't appear abusive, but actually are adverse childhood experiences because they don't fall within appropriate sunshine type love that we want the tomato plant to grow under. And so we'll probably wrap up there for this episode. But again, just remember, we told you sort of before we launched into this little talk about parents and children and how to best raise a child. You may be saying, again, why would you postulate all this? You sort of heard our logic for why we think that's the best way to raise children. And so if you agree with us, that's great. We're glad you agree with us. But it's important not to reject what could be a good theory that could be helpful just because you maybe think the person doesn't have the correct credentials or enough experience. By that logic, we would have to only listen to people who had the most children. Some people, some are very famous, have over 10 children. We hope that you take what we've said in this chapter at its face value if you agree with it. I think generally what we're saying is pretty commonly accepted, but it's important to realize that those adverse childhood experiences and the introduction of hate then leads to the guilt is why we talk about it so much in the social blueprint. Generally, how we see the best path for a child being based on our experiences, based on what Abby and I have observed going through life. True, we're not parents, but you're never going to find someone who has been an expert on every subject. For our unified social theory, we think we have sort of hit the arrow pretty close to the bullseye on this one. But decide for yourself. Do you think what Abby and I are saying makes sense? And if so, that's great. If you disagree because of something we say, not because of who we are. Hey, Abby?
Yes, indeed. And if you think, well, one episode isn't enough to really get a full grasp of a social theory about how parenting works because it's such a complex issue, we can assure you that one of the driving forces of why we are doing this is because we want future generations to have the best possible start. We want humanity to have an upward trajectory of being awesome and having less damage as they grow up. And the best way to have less damage is to show more love. So we will have many, many examples of maybe some parenting tactics that we've seen that we believe cause damage that people might not realize cause damage. And we'll have examples of parenting tactics that we believe are very positive in reducing or eliminating damage or avoiding damage. And we'll have those throughout the series. So please stick with us and please keep an open mind and just see if it makes sense to you as a tactic unto itself.
I like it. All right. Well, we hope you tune in next time for episode 13.
Episode 14. This was episode 13.
Yes.
Have a great day.